The United Kingdom, an archipelago north of the European mainland, extends from the chalk cliffs of the English Channel to the fjords of northern Scotland. To the west, it crosses the sea to embrace Northern Ireland. Its 16,000 kilometres of coastline, contrasting landscapes and great divergence of latitudes have resulted in an extremely unequal distribution of the people throughout the country. There's a pronounced mismatch between north and south, between deserted counties and congested cities, between London and the rest of the country. By ruling the waves, the United Kingdom extended its territory well beyond its own borders, developing trade and building an empire which reached its peak in the early 20th century. Yet ancient divisions still threaten the nation's equilibrium and integrity, even today. Let's take one day, from sunrise to sunset, to discover the forces which drive and shape the territory of this country, which has now chosen a very different European destiny for itself. It's 5 in the morning. At Peterhead in northern Scotland, Jimmy Buchan's trawler Amity 2 is coming into port after 10 days fishing in the North Sea.
Before people are even thinking about getting up. We're landing the white fish first for the market.
Different species, we've got cod, haddock, whiting, monks, roaches, lemon, sole, plaice.
We'll then land the langoustines. That is the cream of the shot. That's the one that's worth a lot of money and will be sent all over Europe within a matter of hours. So it's a very, very fast and speedy process.
At the other end of this great island, on the southern coast, the ballet of trains carrying merchandise through the Channel Tunnel is already underway. The tunnel is now 20 years old. It has physically linked the United Kingdom to the European continent, making it its main trading partner. 24/7, 365 days a year, heavy goods vehicles with their contents and drivers are loaded onto the huge freight trains which then hurtle through the tunnel under the channel. The flow is closely supervised by the technicians at the English terminus in Folkestone.
So you need the route through the access 158, over?
That's correct.
Okay, so you don't move for the moment.
Okay, cheers up.
Thank you, cheers. Son train trop long.
On va bloquer l'accès à 4 plateformes si on fait ça.
Neil Page oversees operations from the Underground Control Centre at Folkestone, which boasts Europe's largest visual control panel, measuring 32 metres end to end.
The UK terminal on the left, the French terminal on the right. Trains are on the platforms where they're loaded, they go into the tunnel. The North Tunnel is the normal tunnel that's used for trains travelling from UK to France. Exits the tunnel, goes around in the loop so it's correctly positioned for unloading, it's reloaded, and heads back to the UK in the South Tunnel. In the first year of operations, we had about 100,000 freight shuttles running through and carry 1.6 million trucks today. So in terms of traffic increase, it's been phenomenal.
Rolling out of the shuttles, the HGVs take the M20 motorway towards London. At this early hour, the traffic is very heavy. It's only 100 kilometres to the capital, but it takes a good 2 hours. While a lot of traffic between the UK and continental Europe is concentrated at the tunnel, the island also has several major ports which link it to its import-export partners throughout the world. Germany, the Netherlands and the northern nations, but also the United States and China. And even today, 50% of goods are still transported by sea. At the same latitude as the tunnel, the ports of Bristol, Southampton and Felixstowe, which date back to the days of the Empire and before, are already busy at 6 in the morning. And all these ports gravitate in the orbit of London, the world in a city which takes the lion's share of their traffic. For hundreds of years, London owed its prosperity and expansion to the River Thames, which flows through the city from end to end. Ships from around the world would unload their goods at London's docks, which stretched for kilometres right into the centre of the city. The historic heart of London, right on the Thames, brings together its seats of political power, the royal palaces, and its seats of economic power, the buildings in the city square mile. Facing the city is the 310-metre-high skyscraper, the Shard, which opened in 2012. Rising from the historic heart of London, it symbolises the capital's continued vitality and incredible dynamism. It's nearly 8 o'clock, and at the London Stock Exchange, bells will soon chime to announce the opening of the markets. The city is an enclave of 3 square kilometres, which benefits from advantageous tax laws. The reason hundreds of banks, half of the world's insurers, and 80% of its investment funds have a presence here. $1 billion is traded here every minute. Formerly the nerve centre of a vast trading empire, the capital is today a major financial centre, connected to the rest of the world via an extensive network of fibre optic cables under the sea. Faster than satellite links, these ultra-high-speed connections connect London to New York, Hong Kong and Tokyo. Stock market operations are now carried out 1 million times faster than 10 years ago. This high-frequency trading has completely revolutionised the markets. Huyn Gentrieux is a new type of businessman who fuses traditional finance with the latest technologies.
So over the last 10 years, 1 million more people have moved into London. London has emerged also as what we call the fintech capital of the world. So any innovation linked to technology and finance really is in London today, much more than New York, the Silicon Valley, or Hong Kong, for example.
And while the city remains the centre of traditional finance, the beating heart of this new fintech has set up shop 5 kilometres away in the booming new neighbourhood of Canary Wharf, built on the site of the docks which made London's fortune. Several thousand new companies were created in London over the last 2 decades. These are quite often small concerns, which come to Huey for support and advice.
So the skyline of London has totally changed over the last 10 years. Now when you look at London, so if we look at the Shard, if we look at the Cheese Grater, if we look at the Heron Tower, all of those towers didn't exist 5 years ago. And the reason is that the government was very, very proactive in encouraging startups here in the UK.
A consequence of London's expansion and enrichment is that living in the centre is now unaffordable to most people. As a result, the well-off young workers of Canary Wharf have flooded into what used to be working-class inner-city neighbourhoods, transforming them in a process dubbed gentrification by sociologists. The British capital is one of the most expensive cities in the world for property. 5 kilometres from the city, the average price per square metre is about €12,000. 3 kilometres away, it's from 15 to 18,000 euros, and in the centre, the average price is about 25,000 euros per square metre. London is far from being just its historic centre and the neighbourhoods clustered around the city. London is immense and its population continues to grow by 100,000 every year. Greater London comprises 32 boroughs, forming what is strictly speaking considered London. Its edges 25 kilometres from the royal palaces at its centre. It is home to 8,600,000 people. Beyond Greater London, though, throughout the green belt created in 1947 as an encircling lung of vegetation, is the metropolitan area. It's a densely populated part of England into which, since the 1960s with the creation of new towns like Milton Keynes, people have been fleeing to escape the problems of urban congestion. 15 million people live in this commuter belt, which extends the capital's outer limits 150 kilometres from its centre. In all, London and its metropolitan area are home to around 23 million people, over a third of the entire population of the United Kingdom, crammed into a fifth of its territory. London, then, is the bloated capital of an unequally inhabited country. And onto this demographic imbalance weighs the burden, both real and symbolic, of what the British themselves call the North-South divide. For most Brits, this North-South divide is an unavoidable fact of life, part of their shared conception of the kingdom. Benjamin Hennig, who teaches geography at Oxford University, shows how this divide is inscribed into the landscape. The split occurs at about 150 kilometres from the capital.
The Romans built the Fossway, which was the first western border of the Roman Empire before the Romans started conquering lands further north. These started the early manifestation of the division between the north and the south.
The Roman Fosse Way linked Exeter to Lincoln and separated the chalky, relatively flat regions of the south from the hillier, granite regions of the north, where the mining resources that fueled the Industrial Revolution were all concentrated.
And we are just really flying over this line at the moment, which is dividing these geological areas. There, that's where industry started. Nature really provided what made the north being as great as the industrial heartland at the time.
It was the great cities of the Midlands and the north, Birmingham, Sheffield and Manchester, that became the strongholds of the British steel and textile industries. The factories grew up around the mines which extracted the iron and coal that were abundant in these areas.
The wealth of the north was brought towards the south. Industrialization here in the north provided the basis for the United Kingdom as a whole country to build up its empire. Quite often these thriving industries kept the country going for almost 2 centuries. So up until the late 1980s,
"250 kilometres north of London, Sheffield was the capital of British steel. It's where stainless steel was invented and was thus the home of innovation in steel metallurgy.
Sheffield Steel is well known, and this is one of the smaller steel factories, but which is one of the very few in the area here which is still being used today.
The death of steelworking in Sheffield, or of the textile industry in Manchester, a city once nicknamed Cottonopolis, and the general decline of industry in the north of England have made the reconversion of these towns a brutal necessity. Northwest of Sheffield, Liverpool is another former great industrial city. But it was also, and mainly, a flourishing port. In the 19th century and up until the 1930s, Liverpool's income was superior to that of London. But from 1931 to 2001, the city lost over 400,000 inhabitants, half of its population. Today it's gradually becoming repopulated, but it is above all a popular tourist destination nowadays. It's the hometown of the Beatles, of course, and the Liverpool Maritime Mercantile City is a UNESCO-designated World Heritage Site. It's just turned 10:30, and Tristan Brady Jacobs is at his cutting board. Tristan is an urban artist with a particular interest in the remains left behind by the working classes when they upped and left. He's been living in Liverpool for 20 years.
England at that time was a very dark grey place. My friends in Newcastle upon Tyne just thought I'd upped and disappeared in a puff of smoke. All around me was evidence of abandonment and desolation. And to some extent, I loved it. It was a really fascinating time.
Undertaking his research and his artistic projects takes Tristan all over town.
So we're in the Baltic Triangle, which is one of the last sort of industrial spaces. On the right is the Herculaneum dock. So this has become something of one of those less benign interstitial space in cities where old factories have been flattened and car dealerships have sprung up.
On the seafront, the Albert Docks, vestiges of Liverpool's past grandeur, have been totally renovated.
The buildings were just used by junkies and pigeons. And with the European money and a lot of imagination and verve, the city has turned it into one of the world's great tourist attractions. It's for Beatles fans. Liverpool, and always has been, a city of front. You see it in the girls out on a Friday and a Saturday night. They are absolutely packed with makeup and just gaudy like butterflies. They're going to die after one night, but it's front.
Three kilometres from the centre, on Crosby Beach, iron men stand facing the sea.
When it arrived, its poetry is just immediate. It sits with the landscape, this flat beaches, these small, dark figures. But it's also about what's coming over the horizon, what's the potential in the future.
The Iron Men have been staring obstinately at the sea for the last 20 years, which only seems right. In the past, after all, the sea has so often been the country's salvation. It was through ruling the waves that Britain ruled the world, and just as its industries were on the wane, the country had the good fortune to find enormous gas and oil fields under its waters. Hidden treasure indeed, and the start of a new adventure. Since the 1970s, the exploitation of the offshore gas and oil fields in the North Sea has transformed the very landscape of these coastlines. In northeast Scotland, Aberdeen has become a town totally dependent on the riches flowing from the hydrocarbons in the North Sea. It's 11 o'clock at Aberdeen Airport. After being held up by poor weather conditions in the North Sea, this relief team, one of many, can finally take off for the Elgin Franklin rig and begin their 3-week shift at sea, 250 kilometres east of Aberdeen. And here's the nerve centre of the setup.
Okay, thank you.
This is where Elgin's workers supervise the whole production process, the firefighting system and emergency shut-off.
These guys in the control room can control everything on the plant. Every valve that's got any function, these guys can control that on the plant itself. That's for on the Elgin PUQ, Elgin A, Elgin B, Franklin and West Franklin. Even though those last two are remote, they're still controlled from here. But perhaps the most important thing today they're doing is to optimise the wells.
Drilling began here in 2000, and it's a good illustration of the problems this industry faces in extracting gas and oil from pockets buried in rock at a depth of 6 kilometres. The United Kingdom's oil and gas production depends on a network of some 600 drilling rigs. The hydrocarbons flow through thousands of kilometres of undersea pipelines, and the network is connected to most countries in Europe. The United Kingdom can supply more or less half of its own consumption needs with its own oil and gas. But over the last 15 years, the production of British oil has halved. The fields are running dry, and the rigs have to be dismantled, a long and costly operation. Plus, there's the vast network of undersea pipelines to be maintained. Just like its European neighbours, the country is having to rethink its energy model. It has started to do this by focusing on the renewable energy sources with which nature has been so generous. First of these is wind, which blows abundantly over practically the whole kingdom. In the United Kingdom, wind power is now an unavoidable fact of life, accounting for 10% of its electricity production. With 1,452 wind turbines spread over 27 sites in 2015, the United Kingdom took second place to Germany as the world's leader for offshore wind power, with China coming third. This massive and for the most part successful conversion to wind power has encouraged more innovation in the world of energy production. The United Kingdom possesses another very promising source of energy: wave and tidal power. The archipelago is situated at the confluence of several seas: the North Sea, the Irish Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean. Where their waters meet, the speed of the currents and height of the tides is magnified. Lisa Mackenzie works for EMEC, the European Marine Energy Centre, a public organisation conducting research into the future of tidal energy.
Okay.
To the north of Scotland, the Orkney Islands are a massive natural testing ground for this energy source. Over the last 2 decades, all the companies committed to its development have been coming here to test their hydraulic turbine prototypes.
We're arriving at the tidal test site now, and you can see Open Hydro's test platform in the water just down in front of us. The turbine is out of the water at the moment. The turbine itself is 6 metres in diameter, so it's quite a big piece of machinery. But when this company deploys on a more commercial scale, they've been developing 16-metre and even 20-metre diameter turbines.
At the southern tip of the archipelago, the strait separating the Orkneys from mainland Scotland has been nicknamed the Saudi Arabia of sea power. The speed of the currents here is spectacular, up to 5 metres per second, and the tides are some of the fastest in the world, at times reaching speeds of 30 kilometres per hour. The authorities have launched a very ambitious undertaking, the MayGen project, the construction of the world's largest tidal energy plant. By 2021, about 60 turbines should provide electricity for 40,000 Scottish homes.
This is the strongest tidal strait in Europe, so there's a lot of power that could be harnessed from within the tides of the Pentland Firth. This is one of the most advanced sites being developed at the moment.
For its test site, EMEC chose Billia Crew Beach on the west coast. The technology being perfected at EMEC is all part of a commercial strategy.
The technologies that are testing here in Orkney are going to need a market, and they're going to want to sell their technologies not just in the UK or in Europe, but they're going to want to go to the Americas and to Asia to sell their technologies as well.
The sea is the United Kingdom's natural partner. Paradoxically, just as these ultra-modern tidal turbines are starting to supply electricity, the fishing sector is in a bad way, adversely affected over the last few decades by European regulations. 50 kilometres north of Aberdeen, Peterhead is by far the most active fishing port in the United Kingdom. It's 11:30 in the morning. At Peterhead Wholesale Fish Market, business is over for the day. It's been a great morning for Jimmy Buchan, who has sold all of his catch. He carefully sorted through beforehand, favouring as always the consumers of continental Europe, by far his best customers.
It's a very nice fish, nice and meaty, much sought after by our European cousins again, more than the Brits. It's funny, we're an island nation and we've got this wonderful seafood. I just don't think we fully appreciate. But I would think Spain definitely one of them, France another, Italy. But these are the big fish-eating nations. But there's quite a lot of squid in today, so though it's quite a big market, 500 boxes in this market is squid. And now it's quite a lucrative sector of the industry to be in, and one of the good things about that is it's quota free. There is no quota on it. So
the fishing quotas imposed by the European Union have been a successful means of collectively managing the resources, but have caused an extensive restructuring of the sector. In Peterhead, 3/4 of the fishing fleet has disappeared over the last 25 years.
I'm now into my 40th year. We've learned from our lessons, and hopefully we can lead to the future. But what we've got to do is find our own new fishermen.
In order to go on making a living from the sea, many have now given up their trawlers, nets and deep-sea outings. The business is changing, and Scottish fishermen are being replaced by salmon farmers. It's such a flourishing sector that it's altering the look of the Scottish outdoors. Most of the fish farms are located in the Orkneys, the Shetlands, and on the western and northern coasts of the Scottish mainland. This is Skourie. At Loch JOUR Fish Farm, it's time for the daily trip to the pens to re-oxygenate the water for the salmon. The farm employs 100 people and stretches through the fjord for 15 nautical miles.
The challenge is, this is the best place to be farming fish, but it's also the most difficult because nature can be punishing. We've experienced hurricane winds, we've experienced invasions of jellyfish, which was potentially devastating.
The salmon hatch in the freshwater hatcheries, where they remain for the next 18 months. They're gradually accustomed to salt water before being transferred to sea pens, where they live until they're 3 years old.
This is 3 years. It's a lot to do, a lot to manage. Salmon is a carnivore, it eats a lot, and so you have to start with really good food for the fish. And we have a very high percentage of fish meal and fish oil in the pellets, and that gives it a robust, distinctive salmon taste.
Today, the salmon industry in Scotland is worth £1.5 billion, and it accounts for 94% of the salmon produced in the European Union.
Salmon farming is a new and exciting industry, and we're learning all the time. And the reason why you meet lots of young, intelligent, very scientifically aware people in the company is because they've come here because they want to be part of that journey. Our definition is we have to be able to do what we're doing now in 100 years' time and 200 years' time. And if you think about that, that is a good barometer.
It's 1 in the afternoon, lunchtime for the Loch JOUR workers, who take a break right on the water. Back to London. Even at lunchtime, the metropolis is abuzz with movement and activity. In the Notting Hill neighbourhood, it's party time, with Europe's biggest street carnival. Instigated 50 years ago by the West Indians living in this part of London, the carnival now draws over 1 million people every year. Right at the heart of the carnival, Augustine Pepe Francis is a veritable institution.
Immigrants that came in the early days was living around the Ladbroke Grove area. So that is why they had quite a large Trinidad population in Ladbroke Grove. But now it's become a Caribbean kind of carnival. It takes in everybody now.
Just a bit further up the road, Tanya's taking part in the festival, as she does every year. It's a tradition she's inherited from her mother, and she wouldn't miss it for the world.
My mum, she's from Trinidad, so for her it's a cultural thing. It's the most important event in the year because the origins of why Carnival came to this part of London was because of the immigration wave during the 50s and the 60s when most people of West Indian descent, they ended up here, and so they brought that tradition over with them from the islands. Now, you know, you've got everyone comes here. You've got Brazilians, you have Spanish, you have samba, you have capoeira, you've got everything.
With the rise in property prices, the West Indian community has mostly been forced out of Notting Hill and the centre of the capital. London is made up of a mosaic of neighbourhoods in which the descendants of diverse peoples from the former British Empire coexist. One major wave of immigration was that from the Indian subcontinent in the 60s and 70s. Many of these immigrants settled in Southall, an area of West London 15 kilometres from the centre. In Southall, otherwise known as Little India, the shops and restaurants are almost all run by British descendants of Indian and Pakistani immigrants.
Anybody waiting on a queue, please?
Southall is home to a sizable and influential Sikh community. Southall's Gurdwara Sri Guru Singh Sabha is Europe's largest Sikh temple, built with money donated by its congregations. It's a place of worship, of coming together, and also of charity. Every day, the temple feeds the local poor. While Southall is predominantly home to people from the Indian subcontinent, there are people from other parts of the world too. New waves of immigrants regularly come to London and make it their home. The British capital is a constantly shifting mosaic. And this multiculturalism isn't just an urban phenomenon. It also extends into rural zones where, for the last 15 years or so, immigrants have made a place for themselves as agricultural workers. But unlike the melting pots of the cities, which for the most part consist of people from outside Europe, the English countryside mainly attracts East Europeans, especially Poles, who over the last 10 years have become the United Kingdom's largest immigrant community. And these 830,000 Poles have pointed the way to the English countryside to their East European neighbours. On Chegworth Farm in Kent, the apples are picked by hand. It's seasonal work, for which the immigrant workers, both flexible and cheap, are a godsend.
I'm from Lithuania. My friends is from Poland, from Romania, from Bulgaria. Before 4 months in June, I come just to his farm and I'm back. I'm very good. I like.
We have a lot of pickers who are Eastern European, and there's a mix of how they work with us. So we have a lot of people who work with us year-round on the farm and will move around with the seasons. So going forward, we hope that there's going to be a really good, clear strategy in place that means that we'll still have access to those people who want to come over here and work for us.
The use of European labour in this way is possible because of the extreme flexibility of the British labour market. But Brexit will almost certainly restrict free movement of workers to the United Kingdom. Of all the United Kingdom's agricultural areas, the largest and most fertile is East Anglia. It's here where some of the country's most intensive industrialised farming is done. The farms are vast, sometimes over 1,000 hectares. Vegetables, oilseed crops, wheat, barley, corn and potatoes are grown here on an industrial scale. The grain silos look like skyscrapers, and the livestock rearing methods are on the same sort of scale. For the country is far from being self-sufficient. It produces only 59% of the food it consumes and imports the rest, mainly from other nations in Western Europe. North of East Anglia, the terrain becomes hillier, the soil poorer, and the climate more demanding. There are fewer crops here, fewer harvests. Now we're entering sheep country. In the northwest of England is the Lake District, the country's largest national park. In Ennerdale Valley, Will Rawling and his son are sheep farmers, just as their family has been for generations. In the early afternoon, it's time to herd the flock together.
So the way we operate this farm is we use the natural attributes of the herd week, which is its ability to survive in areas where probably no other sheep would be able to survive. We rely very heavily on the hefting instinct of the sheep, which is the sort of territorial instinct of the sheep to stay in their own flocks. We can pretty much gather the area that we would expect to find our sheep on and get the majority of them.
The only land the Rawlings actually own is a few hectares around their two farms. But free access to common grazing land owned by others is a right won through ancient struggles and is necessary for the continuation of this traditional form of farming.
All of that common land out there is in a higher level stewardship scheme, in conjunction working with Natural England to maintain the environment, landscape, wildlife habitat, clean water, a little bit of thought around carbon management as well.
Natural England is the public organisation which helps to protect England's nature and landscapes. The financial aid which the farmers receive from the government is conditional on their collaborating with programmes of environmental protection.
We as farmers would be able to use our traditional knowledge, skills and management practices to provide the outcomes that the Natural England, the general public, everyone's perception of what the Lake District should look like. I'm sure we could do that. We've been doing it for a long, long time.
The support of family businesses like that of the Rawlings is all the more important in a country in which most farmers rent the land on which they work from large landowners. North of the Lake District and 600 kilometres from London, here is Scotland. Its two major cities, which rival yet complement each other, are only 50 kilometres apart. To the west is Glasgow, Scotland's economic capital, formerly the site of the world's greatest shipbuilding industry. To the east of Glasgow, Edinburgh is the political capital, the seat of Holyrood, the Scottish Parliament, since 1998. The Act of Union between England and Scotland in 1707 gave birth to Great Britain and did away with the Scottish Parliament, a cause of grievance for generations of Scots until Holyrood's recent rebirth. And now perhaps it will finally be possible to reform the system of land ownership, which has remained frozen in its old feudal state.
Delta Alpha taking off from my 08.
This is a particular preoccupation for Andy Whiteman, a forestry expert and member of the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood since 2014. Up until the end of the 18th century, the Highlands remained apart from the rest of the world, and even from the rest of Scotland, which had started modernising. Most farmers were tenants, not owning the land they worked.
So for thousands of years, Scotland has been held under a system of feudal tenure, feudalism. Scotland's got a very different land history from continental Europe. Following the French Revolution in 1789, we've never had a successful revolution in Britain. And that's meant that the aristocracy have kept hold of large areas of land, estates that maintained their political power as well.
This region, in the hands of large landowners, has escaped the control of Edinburgh right up until the present day.
We're flying over now a large estate called Blackford Estate, which is actually owned by Mohammed Al Tajir from the United Arab Emirates. Another small estate here, this is Abarucho Estate. This is an example of an estate that is now owned by a Russian oligarch. In fact, I'm not even clear who they are because it's owned by a company in a tax haven, I think in Grand Cayman in the Caribbean. This is becoming a little bit of an issue in Scottish politics because we want to know who owns the land.
In Scotland, the proportion of public land is very small, accounting for only 12% of the territory. 50 or so private estates are over 20,000 hectares. Browland is 31,000 hectares, Glenarvan 41,000. The largest can be as big as 100,000 hectares. The Duke of Westminster, a close relative of the English royal family, owns some 94,000 hectares of land in Scotland, more than 100 kilometres north of Edinburgh. Right in the middle of the Highlands is Balmoral Castle, owned by the royal family since the mid-19th century. Even today, it remains the Windsors' preferred summer residence, a fact which only reinforces the upper-class, aristocratic aspect of the Highlands.
Queen Victoria bought Balmoral and she began the kind of romantic era of Scotland. And it became very fashionable then to own land in the Highlands and to wear the kilt.
Queen Victoria's purchase of Balmoral brought the nearby village of Braemar into the limelight. Every year, on the first Saturday in September, the village holds the Braemar Gathering, the most famous Highland Games in the country since 1832. It's exactly 3 in the afternoon. Like every year, the Queen, accompanied by other members of the royal family, has come to honour the Braemar Gathering with her presence.
So often this year, but from everyone on Royal Deeside in your beloved Highlands, we too are proud to wish you happy birthday, Your Majesty.
In the midst of this jolly jumble of folklore, we find Natalie Duclos, a university lecturer on British civilization. She's especially interested in the roots and particularities of Scottish uniqueness.
I would say Scotland is rather proud of not having been conquered as opposed to the other small nations of the British Isles. The Scottish union with England is very different from the Welsh one and from the Irish one, because the Welsh and the Irish union were in fact conquests of Wales and Ireland by England. So they were not voluntary unions. Scotland's union with England was very much signed voluntarily by both countries. So that's the major difference.
Get the drop in straight away and lock the left leg out. Let's go tight and make them work for it. You're strong. You are strong. Together! Hey, get him over! Hey, get him over!
Confident in the strength of its undeniable cultural singularity, Scotland can also count on its economic dynamism when negotiating with England and Wales the conditions for the coming divorce from Europe. Across the Irish Sea, the situation of the United Kingdom's fourth nation is quite different. Over the last few years, Northern Ireland has managed to maintain a certain prosperity by profitably carving a niche for itself in the European Union. Brexit, however, could upset the balance, and Northern Ireland still hasn't finished dealing with the old challenge of reconciliation. Belfast, capital of the kingdom's fourth nation, is a city in which segregation remains an everyday reality. It's carved up with walls and barriers that separate the Catholic and Protestant communities. These constructions of iron, brick and concrete, known officially as peace walls, were intended as temporary measures, but they're still standing. In 2013, the British government announced that the walls would all be down within 10 years. but it's a hard promise to keep. Kieran Shannon, a community worker for the association Intercom, is trying to persuade the people of Belfast to accept the demolition of the walls.
The Shankill Road is well known throughout the world. The other side of the wall here beside us, you have the Falls Road, which is very much a Republican nationalist area. Really what they are, or what we would talk about, are segregation barriers, because the purpose is to segregate communities from each other.
And now, just as the Berlin Wall used to, they drew tourists. But the sectarian problems still persist in Belfast and in the rest of Northern Ireland.
Ideally, someday we'd love to see the walls coming down. That's a long-term goal, and there's been some work started on that, but a long way to go.
In North Belfast, Alexander Park is cut in half by a 3-metre-high wall, separating the Protestant neighbourhood of Shaw Road from the Catholic community of Antrim Road. But since 2011, there's been a gate in the wall, and it's Sergeant Nick Williams' job every morning to open it.
We want our young people to be able to move back and forth and meet each other and play football and all the things that young people do, so it's very much a community-led thing.
For Nick, the open gate in the Alexander Park wall shows the way forward, even if peace for the moment is still a day-to-day challenge.
I don't think anybody in an ideal world would want to have a society where you have all these walls and structures. We police the whole city, the whole country, but, you know, we're not naive. There is a threat level, the threat is severe. We do have to deal with that.
It's 6 o'clock. In Belfast, it's time to close the gates in the peace walls as the neighbourhoods withdraw into themselves for the night. Schoolboys stop off on their way home from school for a game of football. It was in England that the sport was invented 150 years ago. Every town, big or small, has its own stadium, team, and a family of loyal supporters. Football seems to ignore the north-south divide, since both Liverpool and Manchester are home to some of the wealthiest and most prestigious clubs in the country. Yet in 2016, it was a club of more modest means, Leicester City, which pretty much to everyone's surprise won the Premier League. John Williams is a sociologist. He spent his life studying the fundamental importance of football to British society.
The football here kind of epitomises the tensions between the north and the south of England. And that's particularly because the game began as an amateur sport. And its roots lie in the English public schools, so it comes from the elite upper classes. Of course, the north is very proud now, because the north has great football centres, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, but there is still that tension, you know.
Leicester's victory in 2016 was an immense source of joy. Suddenly, the town became a more prominent feature on the map of Great Britain, and neutrals all over the country started rooting for the plucky outsiders who managed to defeat the giants and confound the logic of the big business of modern-day football.
Last season, Leicester City said, no, actually, sport is back. You get the right team, doesn't matter how much money you've got, you can still do it. And that was a very powerful story for sport.
The 32,000-seater King Power Stadium isn't big enough for all the club's supporters. But rather than stay at home and watch their team on the telly, many prefer the conviviality of the pub. It's 8 o'clock. In the great metropolis of London, the working day is over and the offices are emptying. Here too, it's time for a drink or two in the pub. More than a cliché, this is a veritable institution, firmly rooted in the British mentality. In London, Huynh Nguyen Trieu and his finance colleagues celebrate the signing of a new contract on the 32nd floor of the Shard, 200 metres above the Thames. In the North Sea, a working team is flying home to Aberdeen from the Elgin Franklin rig. It's 11 o'clock. The day is drawing to a close in the United Kingdom. The rhythm slows down. But even at night, the heart of this world-class economy goes on beating. The country is at present setting out on a new path to stay in the top rank of world economies. Its challenge for the future will be to involve all four of its nations on an equal footing.